From Nevada Public Radio, I'm Joe Shaneman. It's State of Nevada, and I'm here today with Amber Renee Dixon, host of Nevada Week on Vegas PBS for this special one-hour show. Amber, welcome to the show.
Hi, Joe. I'm excited to be here, and this will be my very first show with live callers. So bring them on. And if you want to see us in action, we are live streaming this at vegaspbs.org as well as knpr.org.
And our guests today are two former politicians, one a Democrat, one a Republican. Chris Giunchigliani served 16 years as a Democrat in the Nevada State Assembly. She also served 3 terms in the Clark County Commission. Warren Hardy, a lobbyist, served just over 1 term as a Republican in the state Senate. Chris, Warren, welcome back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And while we have questions for them, we really want to hear from you. Your questions and comments like, who do you like for president? What about for the mayor of Las Vegas? There are also a lot of ballot questions this year dealing with reproductive rights, ranked choice voting, so much more. So call us. The number is 702-258-3552. That's 702-258-3552. You can also email us at son@knpr.org.
And we're going to start with a comment from a listener who called in before the show, and he's talking about why he's changing his vote from Republican to Democrat.
I just want to say my name is Gene Lampkins. I'm calling from Las Vegas, Nevada, and I am a registered Republican. But this election, I'm going to vote Democrat because, as far as I'm concerned, we have to get Donald Trump in the rearview mirror so that we can get a respectable Republican to run for office. That's it. Thanks.
Chris Giunchigliani, in Clark County, from early voting and mail-in ballots, Republicans seem to be outdoing Democrats. As for independents, nobody is really quite sure how they'll vote. But as a Democrat, what does that say to you about interest by Democratic voters this year?
I think interest in voters by Democrats, it's still early. The mail ballots are coming in. They 30,000 in the first 2 days. You know what? It's about turnout in the long run, and I think Warren and I experienced that when you campaign. I think, unfortunately, down-bottom tickets, Democrats that are running have not been campaigning as strongly as they should in their own little assembly districts and Senate districts. That affects the up ticket higher as far as energy and engagement. So I think that's part of the problem that may be going on right now. I think the caucuses of, this is a safe seat. What does that really mean? In my opinion, you still have an obligation to go out and knock on a door and send a mailing and hold a town hall and talk with your constituents so at least they know more about you other than just your party. And so I think that's the grassroots. I have not seen as much of it. Culinary knocked on my door last week, but outside of that, I have not seen anybody.
Speaking of culinary, some people are saying the culinary hasn't been out as much this year as they have in the past. Have you heard that or seen that?
I've seen that. They did knock on my door last time, but I think I had 3 times that they came last time, once this time. So where their engagement is, they may be focusing on other districts. I'm in a fairly Democratic district. I'm behind the old Gorman off of Okie and Maryland Parkway. But you should just never take voters for granted, in my opinion. In fact, I was at Smith's yesterday buying food, and this young man came up to me and said, "Hey, I loved what you did as an elected. You represented me for 25 years." And I said, "Oh, where do you live?" And he said, on the golf course. I said, "On the apartments there?" He said, "Yeah." And he said, "I'm a doorman at Westgate. I just got a promotion." Really great guy. And I applauded him for that. And I said, "Why are you?" He said, "You always were approachable and you still are. So thanks." I'm like, okay. Life, I think that's part of what's been missing this year. It's been so angry and mean and ugly, and so that tends to take people and make them stay at home. And so I think, to me, for those people that haven't voted, I think this is the year to express some hope. And if you express hope, then hopefully you'll turn out and send your ballot back in or go vote.
Warren Hardy, what about interest by Republicans, which seems, again, higher than 3-4 years ago, or is it on par with Democrats? What are your thoughts? And we had a caller comment, a listener call, and say that he's changing his vote from Republican to Democrat. Are you hearing anything like that?
A little bit, and it actually kind of surprises me because I don't understand. I mean, I'm fairly well known as not a huge fan of Donald Trump, And my wife asked me last night, are you going to vote for Kamala Harris? And I'm like, why would I vote for Kamala Harris? She's completely on the opposite end of the political spectrum for me. The fact that I don't like Donald Trump doesn't mean that I'm going to go to the other side. And so I'm surprised, especially with people like Dick Cheney, for saying, I'm going to basically abandon all the philosophical things I've advocated for through the years, and I'm going to swing the other way. Now, maybe they just hate Donald Trump that much that they're willing to make that kind of a statement, but there's some of that going on out there. And I would say on the Republican side, I think there's enthusiasm, but I think more than anything, Republicans finally pulled their head out of the sand and said, okay, mail-in ballots are here to stay, early voting's here to stay. Let's take advantage of it, and let's fight that fight. I mean, as recently as last time, Donald Trump was telling people not to turn out to vote early. I mean, that's part of the reason I'm frustrated with him is he shoots himself in the foot as a Republican and then reloads. I think they finally sort of figured out. And I think in Nevada, it's largely to do with the efforts of Governor Lombardo and getting involved in this and helping people sort of come to the center and understand. If you look at the candidates that they've recruited, but I agree with Chris. It's early, but I think if I were a Democrat, I would be very, very concerned about the early voting. I mean, everybody, my friends on the Democratic side said, well, it's early. It's not a trend. Well, it's becoming a trend. It's becoming a trend pretty fast. And so I think the early voting numbers combined with what may be happening among Latino voters, we don't know for sure. And frankly, black men, we won't know until, but there seems to be, if you can believe the polling, there seems to be some significant shifts there. I think all are red flags and canaries in the mine for the Democrats. Problem is there's really not much they can do about it. And I'll just say this one thing about the culinary. I always used to chuckle when people talked about the Reed machine. The Reed machine was a culinary union. I mean, that's the most powerful political machine in the history of Nevada and continues to be. The Reed effect was that he was, as majority leader, was able to bring in national talent to a small state. The majority leader sort of has the ability to do that in terms of consultants and advisors. But the boots on the ground, that's a culinary. And I wonder, I wondered this aloud on a radio show last week, whether the culinary are that enthusiastic about the down ticket, knowing that there's been sort of some high-profile division among the legislature and the Democrats. I wondered aloud how much that was going to affect their enthusiasm in running the culinary machine, and I think the numbers, early numbers, are sort of bearing out that maybe they're not as enthusiastic as they've been in the past.
I wonder, Chris, do you agree with Warren that there's nothing Democrats can do at this point?
Oh, there's always, you never take it granted. You go to the last minute that you can as far as that's concerned. But I do think that they need to refocus on turnout. And I don't think if you don't talk to people, how do you know who you want to turn out? So that's a factor that's there. And I think Warren's kind of spot on that part of it. But I would say Nevada's still small, and anything is doable if that's the case. I just don't want anybody taking voters for granted. I don't care if you're nonpartisan, Democrat, or Republican. You should go exercise your right to vote, number one. Number two, I think the ground games are not as strong as they used to be. And there was some issues at the legislative level with regard to the culinary union. They're out there. But again, you're right. The enthusiasm piece may be what's holding things back a little bit. But in the long run, it's going to come down to their economy and how they vote their paychecks, and it's going to come down to policies. And I think people will start to say, oh, wait a minute, I can be pissed at this person, but I need to make sure that I turn out and vote Democratic on this race.
Okay, we want to hear from you. Our number 702-258-3552. You can also email us at son@knpr.org. Let's move to some of the ballot questions, 7 in total. We'll start with ballot question 6. It has to be approved by voters in this election and then again in 2026, and it will amend the state's constitution to make abortion access an individual right. But right now, abortion up to 24 weeks is already legal in Nevada. It's part of state law. It can only be changed by a vote of the people. So, Chris, how necessary is this ballot question?
Very. I worked with the original group of strong women that put together the initiative for that. My late husband actually worked on the language with them. So I kind of have a different perspective as far as that's concerned. We always felt it was safe being in statute, but we've seen the trend across the United States, and then with the United States Supreme Court taking a woman's right to choose away. We need to validate that, put it into the Constitution, and be done with this kind of garbage. They need to stop talking about my body, my place, my choice.
You truly foresee voters in Nevada getting together again and changing this part of state law?
Absolutely. Absolutely, I do. North, south, rural, doesn't matter. It's about reproductive rights, and it's a women's issue, but it's a male issue as well. And I think men that support women with their right for choice will be turning out for that part of it as well.
And then, Warren, bans and restrictions on abortion are rallying cries for Republicans in many other parts of the country. But what about Nevada Republicans? How motivated are they to go out and oppose this ballot measure?
You know, I don't think super motivated. I mean, I think last election cycle, because of the Hobbs decision coming just before the election, it was a significant factor. I don't think it's playing out to be a significant factor here. And as far as question 6, I'm a conservative. I have to define I'm a Kemp Republican, a Reagan Kemp Republican. I used to didn't have to define what kind of Republican I was. But conservative means to conserve, to keep things. I am always very skeptical about putting stuff in the Constitution. We've put tax policy in the Constitution, which has been one of the worst things we can do. I happen to believe that choice, I am pro-life. I happen to believe that choice should reside at the state level with the people. Putting in the Constitution makes a permanency there that I think is inappropriate, not just for that issue and not even specifically for that issue, for all issues. There's at least 2 other ballot questions that I feel the same way about that seem like a good idea on the surface, but the unintended consequences of putting them in the Constitution. We need to get away from this notion of everything goes into the Constitution. I mean, let's just do away with the legislature and let's just go to a vote of the people on everything.
Warren's right. I mean, on policy, I used to chair elections and ethics, and we were very careful about making or approving any constitutional amendments regardless of the policy. So like Warren's saying, do you really need to put the sales tax on diapers in the Constitution? That's a policy issue that should be handled legislatively, not constitutionally.
Well, there are a lot of ballot questions that deal with things that voters think should be handled by the legislature, not by the voters themselves. And Jeff from Las Vegas has a question related to that. One of the ballot questions asks to remove language related to slavery or to make slavery a punishment for certain crimes. But Jeff from Las Vegas, welcome to the program.
Yes, that is state question number 4, and it says that the Nevada Constitution amends and removes the language authorizing the use of slavery and involuntary servitude as a criminal punishment. My question is, how come the politicians in Reno and the governor don't make these decisions and then are held accountable? How come they bring up these proposals and let the voters decide, like voter ID? That's another one that the Nevada legislature should. You know, it's almost like they're not going to be held responsible for any of these decisions. And also, how come there isn't a proposal here for the baseball stadium?
I was a plaintiff in that question.
Or is this a way to avoid responsibility?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, I think it is. I mean, we're talking about the FRI tax, the fuel indexing tax, and everybody wants to go to vote of the people. I mean, I made some hard decisions as a legislator. I voted for the tax increase in 2003 and 2009. That wasn't fun, but it was the right thing to do. But with regard to the question, whatever that was, 4, you know, it's a perfect example. I mean, do we really need to change verbiage in the Constitution? Now, on that question, I think it's the other question regarding intellectual disabilities is really just a verbiage change. This one, I think, potentially, and it's not the question of slavery. I don't think slavery should be in the Constitution. But chattel slavery has been outlawed by the U.S. Constitution, which makes it a moot point in the Nevada Constitution. The concern I have is involuntary servitude, removing that without some further definition, because that will have implications on prison work rules, prison work policies, and those sorts of things that are unintended, and I think will get clogged up in the court. So again, the issue of slavery, which nobody wants to think about or have in the Constitution, is sort of resolved. It's a moot point at this point because of the U.S. Constitution. So I think we need to think about the consequences of removing the involuntary servitude part and what that might happen, what legal ramifications that might have.
I would say sometimes there's language that's cleanup language, and I think they approach the slavery thing verbiage as far as being offended that our Constitution still recognized that, right? So that's kind of a cleanup piece. But Warren's right, because how do you define servitude? And so hopefully there'll be regulatory schemes that'll have to come up to actually define the implementation of that, but it's going to take some court cases.
Yeah, but leave it out of the Constitution.
Years ago, I changed the word idiot. Removed it, and we changed it to mental incapacitated. I can't remember.
And mental hygiene, wasn't that part of it as well? That we removed mental hygiene out of the
I can't
statute?
remember all of them, but it was clean up. And I'm like, I'm a special ed teacher. You don't call my kids an idiot. So we talked about it, and the ballot did pass, and we reworded the reference to what you call. So sometimes it's just more housekeeping-ish, but you have to look at the policy side of how you implement that. And he's right about the servitude issue with regard to our prisons in certain places. There's going to be some challenges that will come in if that passes.
I don't understand what you mean by that. You got to expand on what would be the negative consequence of passing
You
this?
couldn't have workers work in the food industry in the prison system, and if you're not paying them adequately, and what are their benefits that come into play. And I do believe once you're still a human being, and so there's a process. But he's right, it leaves it void, and so when there's a void, you're going to have lawsuits of what is servitude, what constitutes servitude for somebody.
On its face, it's not a problem, right? But trust me, you guys all know lawyers, right? And so it just, when there's that kind of change, lawyers and the public are going to say, what do they mean by that? And they're going to test it, and they're going to challenge it, and there will be lawsuits about involuntary.
But just think about the consequences of not approving that, and how that would probably become national news. Nevada wouldn't approve a ballot question that eliminates the words slavery.
Approved.
It'll pass, and
95%.
But you're going to look at what Warren's talking about is later how you implement law, how you implement constitutional language changes, and that's where the down ballot language on that part of it may come about. But it's like the none of the above that you can choose. Nevada's one of the few that do that. It was my former Assemblywoman, Eileen Brookman, who actually put that language in, and they narrowed it to only certain races. But it doesn't stop. So we've had none of the above win in races, but it doesn't affect the individual that's running. It's more to let people have a protest vote. And so, and I had to remember that the other day because a neighbor asked me, and I was like, oh, yeah, no, that doesn't affect.
So Jerry from Las Vegas wrote in, people are all against Trump while I'm not a fan either. Why don't we just let him get elected and then he'll go away in 4 years? Not
a bad thought. I've actually
scary.
I've actually expressed that. Look, here's the thing with Trump. I mean, last time, I don't know that anybody's a real fan of the way he conducts himself. When he as president, there were very few policies I disagreed with. I disagreed with him a little bit on Syria and a couple other things. But for the most part, his policies were pretty solid conservative. He's sort of abandoned that now. I mean, and that's where my concern lies. What he's done with foreign policy, that's not what the fact that we look to the Democratic Party now to be the defenders of Ukraine and Israel. I mean, that's not republicanism as I know it and understand it and signed up for it. Tariffs. And somebody said to me the other day, well, Biden kept the tariffs in. I goes, yeah, because that's a Democratic policy, not a Republican policy. The isolationism at the international level, it's all feeding to his base who don't really focus on these issues. And traditional Republicans, they don't support tariffs. Ronald Reagan didn't support tariffs. Ronald Reagan would have looked at the situation and said, rather than putting a 200% tariff on John Deere, he would have said, why don't we figure out why labor is so expensive in the United States? That's a conservative perspective. So I think he's departed from traditional conservative viewpoints significantly. And so that's my main problem with him now.
And again, let me put this number out there. Again, our number is 702-258-3552, 702-258-3552. Our email is son@knpr.org. That's son@knpr.org. And if you're listening now, you can also view this at vegaspbs.org.
Yes, you got it.
And knpr.org. We are filming this in a joint production with Vegas PBS. And we have a lot of comments about ranked choice voting and open primaries. And Michael from Las Vegas is with us now. Michael, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Before I just want to make a comment before I get into ranked choice voting. I want the government to stay out of my bedroom, my doctor's office, my library, and quit telling me that this nation was found on Christianity. It wasn't. It was founded on getting away from government-driven church.
Okay.
So that comment I just wanted to make. Now, ranked choice voting, one of their first, the anti people, one of their first things they say in their ad is, you have to actually, find out who these people are before you vote on them. Well, that should have been done a long time ago instead of just voting an R or a D or an I or whatever. Their whole comment is, my God, you have to do your work as a citizen to find out who you're voting for.
A great comment there. And here's another listener who called our voicemail line to record his comment before the show.
Hi, Joe. This is Victor from Henderson. I'm a retired professor of political science with a focus on electoral systems and voter behavior, and I'm calling to comment on question 3 on the ballot that seems to conflate two very important issues, adding to voter confusion. I think these two important issues are important enough to be judged on their own merits separately and not put together in one combined package. It's important to talk about expanding voter participation and having a better way of choosing candidates that the ranked choice voting offers. But it's done in such a way that it creates a lot of confusion, and this confusion is intentional in order to sell a pig in a poke. And this is very unfortunate since both issues clearly deserve to be judged on their own merits. Proposition 3 appears to be financed by out-of-state financial interests, so it's legitimate to ask if this is such a good idea, why don't they spend their money at home to promote similar proposals where they live instead of in Nevada? Or do they consider Nevada as a playpen where they can experiment with their pet political ideas? As a retired professor of political science, I consider this very unfortunate. That these out-of-state financiers refuse to disclose their identity, thereby holding their real motives for spending $15 million to confuse Nevada voters. Thank you.
That is, he makes two really good points. And Chris, one question on the ballot really has two different ideas in it. And he's also talking about outside money as well. We'll get to that. But two different ideas. We are talking about opening the primaries and ranked choice voting. Those, they both have to do with elections,
Exactly.
but they're separate. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are very frustrating because Heidi Gansert, I think, was the one who had the legislation where we did single subject to make sure that it was clear and concise. It went to the Supreme Court, and unfortunately, they did not see that these groups have been hiding behind an open primary debate to get the ranked ballot part. Most people aren't reading to the second page, the second tier. It's unfortunate that the Supreme Court did not clearly see on its face that these are two separate ideas and should have been split. But that's what they're using. The out-of-state folks are funding it and using it as the open primary to let nonpartisans vote. And that's a different debate, and that's fine. But the ranked voting is a very much different animal, and it's going to be very confusing. I think it will actually, if it passes, it'll decrease turnout. Only Alaska, I think, has it. I don't know if anybody else has adopted it.
I think Alaska and Maine.
And so it's like, we are kind of what was the term he used? The playground a playground. And unfortunately, I think they're testing the waters with a small state like us to see if they can get this passed by dumping over $15 million in from out-of-state people.
Warren Hardy.
Yeah, that's not new. I mean, we've been the political laboratory for ballot questions as long as I've been around because we are a small state that looks a lot like the rest of the United States. I had a friend ask me, and I said, unfortunately, I am going to support question 3. I agree with everything Chris just said. I'm not sure why we just don't open our primaries and we have to go to ranked choice voting. But here's where I am personally, from an inside perspective, watching the legislature work. We have a very, very hard time getting moderate candidates through primaries that are willing to work with the other side. When Chris and I came up, and we were elected the same year in 91, we fought like cats and dogs, but at the end we compromised. And now compromise is a dirty word. Well, guess what? The Founding Fathers set up a system specifically to force compromise as a way to protect the minority. And so we're so far afield from that now because people are my way or the highway instead of sitting down and compromising and understanding what Ronald Reagan says, that if you get 51% of what you want, that's a complete political victory. That's lost on folks. We have gotten there are some very good legislators in Nevada who understand that, but it's almost sometimes an anomaly when they get through the primary. So this, in my mind, is really the only way that we can get moderate candidates. I've said this before publicly. The problem right now in politics is not conservatives and liberals. I'm a conservative. Chris is a liberal. I respect Chris. Chris is a liberal who believes that she sees this monolithic thing called government and doesn't understand why it doesn't use its power and wealth to help people. That's not evil. I'm a conservative. I look at it and say it'd be nice, but we can't afford it. That's the fight Chris and I had. Mm-hmm. Now we've got the MAGA right and the woke left who can't get to a place in the middle where they can compromise and do what's right for the state of Nevada. And all we have in front of us right now is question 3 to get to a place where we can I don't think Chris could be elected. I know I couldn't be elected now because I'm not far right enough and Chris isn't far left enough. And she's a solid liberal. Trust me, I've got a lot of political scars. But that's not where we are in Nevada. There's a litmus test for MAGA right or woke left. And if that doesn't change, our system of government doesn't survive.
I hope we can get back to this, but Warren, you are the first politician, well, you are not an active politician, but former politician to say you are in favor of question 3. I thought it's unique in that both Democrats and Republicans have strongly opposed this, and I think that's what draws some people.
I think Warren's looking for the policy side of that potential on ranked voting, and that's a debate to have, but I don't think that's going to be the outcome. You're going to have more drop-off. He's right. Everybody's polarized now. And back to the earlier question that the gentleman called in, and Victor was spot on as well. You can't be a moderate Democrat or a moderate Republican right now. It's just, and that's nationally. That's not just in Nevada. It's almost like, well, why do you see the Cheneys of the world coming out? Because maybe they still believe in the institution. I do go back to lack of civics in our high schools and teaching. I think that that's part of the problem. If it's not on a test, it's not taught anymore. And I think we have an obligation and a responsibility. I mean, remember when they took driver's ed out and we said no? We tried to put it back in and still don't. Why do you have people that don't drive well? Well, you got young kids. Many aren't getting their driver's license, but those that do don't have the training and the practice that comes into play. It's the same thing in politics. You need to make sure that people know about the institution that you respect, and then you can fight about the policy part of it. But government does work. It can work better, but it only works if people are engaged in practicing their right to vote and questioning people.
Well, Chris, we want to get to more calls, but okay. I want to ask you, do you think, though, that in Nevada, moderate candidates are rising to the top? We've interviewed several on this program. From both sides, and there really does seem to be quite a degree of moderate opinions versus like 2014, 2015, exactly. When it was very separate. It seems like a lot of the candidates coming through are more balanced.
I think they are, and that's a plus, and we need to build on that. I think that's where many Republicans that I know have said, we got to stop this MAGA stuff. That's not helping the party. Let's go back to more of the party of the Reagan people, because their voice is just as shut out as Democrats is. And so you have to look at that. So yes, we have done, I think, a good job. So it tells me another reason that ranked voting isn't needed. It's not going to fix the problem. The problem is funding. The problem is better financial disclosure. The problem is, the deep pockets that come in and fund. Those are the things that really affect how a candidate can and can't get elected.
And I would say, Joe, that this is an anomaly this time because I would agree with you. I look at the candidates on both sides. It's been a long time since I've seen such quality candidates, but that didn't happen in a vacuum. I think that happened because Democratic leadership in the legislature recognized that we need to get back to a place where we can work together and have recruited candidates. Clearly, Governor Lombardo getting involved and engaged. That's the only reason it happened on the Republican side, but there are good quality moderate candidates, almost enough to make me oppose question 3 to give it a little time to see if there's another alternative, because I am very encouraged by this election cycle. But a lot of it, and I agree with Chris, is that the Republicans on this election cycle have really made a concerted effort to say we need moderate problem solvers who are going to fix issues and work with Democrats.
Let's get to a call from Michael in Las Vegas.
Michael, welcome to the program. Are you there? Oh, I think we lost Michael. Ranked choice voting, again, is confusing. There is another ballot question that deals with the Board of Regents. I don't think a lot of people really know a lot about the Board of Regents. There aren't a lot of issues except when something really untoward happens. But more specifically, this bill or this ballot question would remove references to the Board of Regents from the Nevada Constitution. It would require a biennial audit of the Nevada system of higher education and the Board of Regents spending, and it would open the door for the legislature to restructure the board it elected or create a hybrid system. Warren Hardy, I have heard people in coffee shops saying they think this is too much, that it would give politicians in the legislature too much power. Is this too much? Is it not enough? What are your thoughts?
Well, as you know, Joe, I've followed this and actually worked on this ballot question last session, just to try to bring some transparency and some accountability. Right now, there are our system of government is built on checks and balances. The judiciary checks the legislature, the executive branch checks. It's a big old, fantastic, beautiful system of checks and balances. The only entity in Nevada that has no checks and balances on it because of the way the Constitution is set up is the Board of Regents. And the problem is not so much that that's the case, it's that the Board of Regents has historically taken significant advantage of that fact. And when the legislature tries to do things to impact higher education, they get sued and they lose because of that constitutional provision. So I think it's all. Now, I will say this. I'm very encouraged with where the Board of Regents is now and what the Board of Regents has been doing. I think that they're much more reasonable in terms of their interpretation. But I can tell you, in all my time in the legislature, there's just been, don't tell us what to do. We are an independent fourth branch of government. And not having some kind of checks and balance. I mean, you can argue whether the legislature is the best one to check and balance. I can tell you that it's not the intention of the proponents of question 1 to change the makeup of the Board of Regents in any way, but really to get some balance and some checks and balance into the process.
And I would echo that. There are 3 branches in government, if you remember your class, not 4. And the Regents have attempted to act as if they're a 4th branch. And so there's been a problem for years. Unfortunately, the question failed last time. They restructured the question this time around. I think it's more balanced. And it was an attempt to say they're still going to do their policy. They're still going to be able to do their, hire their chancellors and whatnot. It's just make sure that the funding stream, because they're state funded, is adequate and appropriate and doesn't hurt community colleges at the expense of the large ones. And how do you all play in the same box together? So I think by passing question 1, it will allow that dialogue to come back and forth rather than just digging in and saying we're the Regents and the Constitution mentions us and we don't have to pay attention to anybody.
Perhaps we could have a Board of Regent call in and let us know what they think about that.
There you go.
But we do want to hear from you. Call in with your question, 702-258-3552. Again, 702-258-3552. In the meantime, let's go to ballot question 7. That deals with whether Nevadans should have to show photo identification in order to vote in person, or if they vote by mail, they'd have to provide certain personal information to verify their identity. A Pew Research Center survey shows most Americans think photo ID should be required in order to vote. Chris, if this increases confidence in our elections, why not implement it?
I still don't support it for the very purposeful reason is you already have to show ID and prove your residency to be a voter in Nevada. If you register to vote online, you still have to present it. And I know because I work the polls. And so I have to ask for an ID. It triggers something because no one has verified and validated them. The sadder part is politicians that run for office that don't actually reside in their districts. There's language that needs to be fixed. This does not fix that part of it. So what happens is whenever you register, you have to show who you are initially. There's a problem, though, with youth that this will become another barrier to. They have school IDs. They don't have their home address. They have to have a power bill, a utility bill besides their photo ID. So we're trying to work with the Secretary of State's office on what other alternative ID can we accept, especially for young people, because they don't have a driver's license these days. So they're not going to go get a state ID card. So we have to fix that problem. But that ballot question is really kind of moot because you already have to show ID in order to register instead of just having to show up. And when I work the polls, if somebody wants to give me their ID, I take it. I'm like, okay, let me just match it back up. But you already showed it to us. It's no different than the signature verification that they just did in the state of Nevada. If you wanted to update your signature, I'm the one who put in law that because I had a constituent who had no hands. And how do you allow that individual to be able to mark their ballot? So we had to come up with language. I think you supported that they could do an X and then there had to be a witness to it so that it was validated, because little things like that you don't realize are unintended consequences.
Warren?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure it should be in the Constitution, but here's what I will say. I mean, I tell people this all the time when they complain about things. You know, democracy's hard. And I think we need to go the extra mile. Again, don't know that it needs to be in the Constitution, but we need to go the extra mile to make sure that our elections can be trusted. Because if they can't, and if there are legitimate reasons why they can't, it causes great problems, as we saw in 2020. So I think that's the minimum we should do to verify that you're actually a registered voter and you're eligible to vote in Nevada. Again, don't know that it should be in the Constitution, but I do support the policy 100%.
I want to read some emails that we have gotten. Joanne says she is a registered independent. The presidential election, to me, she says, is not Republican versus Democrats. It's crazy versus insane, or crazy versus sane, I should say. I listen to what comes out of Trump's mouth, and it's crude, rude, and untruthful. He's clearly not fit to run our country. Republicans themselves are in knots trying to explain what he really means. From Eric, he says, why are we wasting our precious natural resources for solar and wind when nuclear energy is the obvious solution to our energy and climate concerns and takes up far less land and resources? And we have this question directed toward Warren. It says, Warren says he's a traditional conservative, doesn't feel like the Republican Party is where it should be. Does he think the populism that elected Trump in the first place is now a permanent future fixture of the party?
That is a really, really good question. That's a very insightful question. And I do, at least for the time being. And I will say this, that there's nothing wrong with that, right? Reagan was a populist government. Ronald Reagan, in my opinion, was a great president. He was very much a populist government. But what he was driven by was some philosophical beliefs and understandings and things he believed in. He used that populism to advance a revolution, a conservative revolution. Donald Trump has used his popularity or populist perspective to advance Donald Trump. And so Ronald Reagan, what Ronald Reagan did outlasted Ronald Reagan. The Reagan Revolution went on until just recently, and I don't think that the Trump populism will outlast him. And I just think that there's nothing wrong with a populist candidate. In fact, that's kind of the way the system is set up. But I look at Donald Trump as the greatest wasted opportunity to advance conservative principles in the history of the country.
We also have a call, Warren, directed toward you, and this is Will from Las Vegas. Will, welcome to the program.
Hi.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, Warren Hardy's his wife's question to him was legitimate. Why are you voting for Trump, or whether you're going to vote for Trump? I mean, then he speaks admiringly of Reagan. I mean, they have nothing in common. Trump has this no ethics. He admires Hitler. He wants to be a dictator. Reagan had none of those characteristics. I mean, I'm a liberal, but they have nothing in common. Why would you vote for somebody that has solely admire some of his policies? They have nothing in common. I mean, and Trump is the most unethical person that you could imagine.
Let me say this. I'm not sure where from my comments you got that I am supporting Donald Trump. That was the point of my wife's question. If you're not supporting Donald Trump, are you going to support Kamala Harris? I'm not a Trump supporter. I'm undecided on what I'm going to do. I haven't turned my ballot in yet because I don't know what I'm going to do. What I do know is I'm not going to support Kamala Harris and an extension of the policies. So I guess I misunderstand your question. I'm not a Trump supporter.
Her was why would I not support him? I mean that you believe in his policies, quote unquote policies. I'm not sure he has any policies.
I said why would I support Kamala Harris because of her policies? I was trying to make the point that in politics today, people think if you oppose one side, you must automatically support the other. Mm-hmm. My wife's question to me was, you do not support Donald Trump. Does that mean you're voting for Kamala Harris? And what I said to her was, why would I support Kamala Harris? She's the antithesis of everything I believe philosophically. So I'm sorry if you misunderstood my comment.
Will, thank you so much for that comment.
Let's move to the state legislature. And if Democrats keep the seats they now have and flip one Republican seat in the state Senate their way, they will have a supermajority in the Senate. They already have that and are expected to keep it in the Assembly. Chris, from what you know, is this likely to happen?
I have not walked those areas in a long time. So I usually would say by being on the ground, I have been walking, but not for in that section of town where I think those key races are at. If they get the supermajority, I think anybody, Democrat or Republican, needs to remember checks and balances and why you're serving. You're serving from a locality, but you're also a state representative. And I would hope that it's not won't allow for people to be beaten back, bad policy passed, just an attitude of I don't have to work with the governor. You do. You out of respect. I mean, when he was sheriff, he and I argued on some stuff, but he was good to work with, and I think you have to make that extra effort to do that, and a majority might restrict people making that effort to be able to figure out how to come together. But if it happens, it happens, and that actually can be bad for the Democrats if they don't handle their leadership correctly, that whole rhythm of how you pass legislation, because you do need the checks and balances.
Warren, any insight into whether this might happen?
Yeah, so I would say, again, the current turnout trend is a wild card dynamic here. I will say that it would take a significant Republican wave for the Republicans to maintain to prevent a veto-proof majority in the Senate. I think the Senate's going to get the veto-proof majority, but I also think it would require a significantly bad day for the Republicans not to regain. I'm going to try to say this right. Yeah. To not go back to a veto-proof majority in the Assembly.
Really, one question about this, and Chris sort of alluded to this: is it better to have the governor with that veto power, to have separation of powers, to have sort of equal ability to pass legislation on each side, or is it better to have one side that has all the power, or having both sides have a little bit of power? Does that force them more to compromise?
150 million% yes. And I think any legislator who's spent time in the process in their hearts of heart, when they're not, spouting the party line, will acknowledge that divided government works best. It's not fun. I mean, in 2015, the Democrats, I will say this, have traditionally handled that better. My first session, the Democrats controlled all levers of government in 1991, but they were very measured in that. The Democrats have traditionally been fairly measured in that, and would be again. I have friends say, oh, if the Democrats win everything. You mean like they did in 17 when they had both houses and Governor Sisolak, and the earth didn't fall apart? Republicans are, get a little more, because it doesn't happen as often for them. In 2015, they sort of went out and pushed their wish list. But I think in their hearts of heart, any legislative tactician will tell you divided power is better. And I think history supports that, because then it forces you to the table to compromise. The problem is we don't get to the table to compromise as much as we used to.
Term limits affected that.
Term limits,
it was the
worst thing we ever did.
Worst thing ever happened. And that was a national trend from an outside group that came, because I traveled with to Pakistan with the woman who worked on that programming. And they came to Nevada and got that ballot question put into play. And then the judges separated themselves, which I think should have still invalidated the entire question of term limits. That has affected us, because in the long run, you have young people mostly that they never even lobbied, let alone know what the process of the legislature was, how to write a bill, how to craft policy that comes into play. In the old days, we did. It was balanced. You found that you tempered that power, because power can be corrupting if you're not careful with it. It also can be wonderful if you use it to benefit the general good. So I think when Warren and I mean, we had the mean 13 that one year. That was the whole budget crisis, but that's okay. It was over a policy. It was not personal. And I think even if the Dems or maintain or actually succeed in having both houses, they will have to temper it and look at how do you properly manage your people. They can't have everything. You shouldn't have everything. You should have to work for a lot of this stuff, and it forces you. But with 120-day time, you can't get to good public policy. And many of these young folks, I wrote all my own legislation. I did all my own research, and then I gave it to LCB. They don't do the business that way now. It helped me understand who's the pro, who's the con. You're lucky if there's 15 different groups that you're affecting when you're writing legislation. So there's a whole learning curve that needs to come into play no matter what. So if it does happen, I hope that everybody takes a breath and says this is not about getting even. This is not about forcing one agenda over another. This is about making sure that you're looking at the public good, not us as individuals, but the public good that you're supposed to be serving.
And the other thing I would point out with regard to term limits, since we're not on that topic, is it doesn't allow for any mentorship. Chris and I had great mentors in both parties. Mm-hmm. In fact, I tell this story often. As a freshman assemblyman, I intentionally didn't have any legislation. I just sort of wanted to learn the process and maybe take some bad stuff off the books. And Senator Titus came to me, other party, other house, and said, I noticed you don't have any legislation. You really need a piece of legislation. And so she helped me find a bill to put my name on, and Chris helped with this. Chris helped me with this. Democrats in the other party. My mentors were Bill Raggio, Joe Dini, Joe Neal, Ann O'Connell. They don't have mentors anymore because of term limits, and that's the biggest problem.
Speaking of terming out, that is what is happening with Las Vegas Mayor Carolyn Goodman. This will be the first time in 20 years that someone with the Goodman last name is not in that position. How big of a deal is that when you consider what power a mayor has? And then talk about the differences between the two candidates, Shelley Berkeley and Victoria Seaman.
I live in the city. I ran in 2011 and was not. Carolyn got in right at the last minute. She had told me she wasn't running and then filed, but that's the way it goes. And there were 18 candidates at that time. And so I think, 14 in the primary, I think, for this race. That's healthy because it's not about a dynasty. It shouldn't be about a dynasty. But I think in the long run, I don't know Victoria that well, but I do know Shelley Berkeley very well. And I think anybody would feel comfortable with her knowledge base, her ability to listen, and to put the city first. So I think that that's an opportunity for city residents that will have that right to vote. What power does the mayor have? Not a lot, really. The Strip is all in the county. That was the fight Steve used to have with Carolyn. I'm like, stop, both of you. If it's good for everybody, you want to hold a press conference, hold a press conference. Who cares whose face is on this stuff? So you get into some of that part of it. But I think in the long run, this mayoral race is very, very key because you've got two potential new council people coming in. Victoria would still be on the city council for another 2 years. Her voice then should still be listened to. I think she and Shelley both understand we need to get this Badlands off the books. Bob Beers was correct, and I told him that what was it, 18 years ago when we first started dealing with Badlands. It's kind of pitiful that they're wasting my taxpayer dollars. I can say that as a city resident. You did try to do a taking, admit it, and cut the loss and get over it. So I think that's one place where they'll be working together on. But the city's a wonderful place. It's large. It's you have fiefdoms with each of the council members. So you're going to have to spend time. It's like herding cats, and so I think Shelley's been good at that. She always had a good outreach office when she was Congresswoman. She's always accessible, and I think that's what you want in a mayor.
Warren?
Yeah, I mean, it's been funny not funny, haha, but interesting to watch the evolution of the mayorship of Las Vegas. I mean, we ought to change it from mayor to ambassador. It's the ultimate ambassadorship, and Mayor Oscar Goodman did that as well as anybody in the history of the world. I mean, he was such an amazing ambassador for the city of Las Vegas, and Carolyn Goodman's more policy focused, but I still think the immense popularity of the Goodmans was because of that, what they did for the state, for the city as ambassadors. And I think Shelley Berkeley will be a very steady hand. I think Victoria Seaman will shake things up. So I think it really, in terms of a recommendation on who to support, it would depend on what you want for the city. You want somebody to steady the ship where it is, or do you want somebody to shake things up? Because in that regard, I think they're very different candidates.
We have about 4 minutes left. Have there been any particular political ads that either of you have found, I guess, shockingly inaccurate?
I wouldn't say, I don't know. I mean, they're all inaccurate. So the only question is shocking. The thing for me is shockingly effective. And I think if Vice President Harris loses, it's going to be because of this fact. She continues to attack Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a completed, baked in, 100%. Everybody knows who he is, what he stands for, how he acts. So she has got to show how she's different. The way to do that is not to attack him, but she continues to double down on going after Donald Trump. Nobody's going to change their opinion. Everybody has an opinion. It's all baked in. With regard to what Donald Trump is doing, his job, because his positives are so low, is to drag down his opponent. And so he does it in a hyperbolic, obnoxious way, but it's effective. And so she, instead of going blow for blow on a race to the bottom, she needs to try to elevate herself, and she's not doing that. So I really honestly think Donald Trump's ads are brutally effective, and I think Kamala Harris's are not.
And she's also a woman, and you have to navigate politics a bit differently. And believe me, misogyny is out there. I witnessed it myself, still see it. So she has to balance that piece to prove that she's strong. So maybe that's why she's still doing the dismissing of him as a woman, because there's a different category that we're expected to achieve to. I don't watch the commercials. I absolutely stay away from them. I don't believe in TV. I never was a big TV person, even as a candidate. I think it's a waste of money in the long run. I think you should talk to people where they're at. And you can't do that in a large race like a governor and mayoral and whatnot, but you should make the effort to do so. And so I'm not a big fan of commercials because they can say anything they doggone well want to, and then to try to get one taken down off the air is like an act of God. So.
Well, and I wonder how well aware voters are of the inaccuracies of those ads.
It goes to the misinformation and that. I mean, what I just heard on NPR this morning about Russia interfering and doing AI, and that needs to stop. That is degrading to our politics and to our voting rights rather than whether you show an ID or not. It's really the misinformation and the disinformation that's out there.
But I think people do know, and they don't care. Right? Everybody has chosen their sides. I mean, this is you don't normally you'd get a Republican who would run to the right in the primary and then come to the center, a Democrat to the left, and come. They're not doing that. They're staying in there, which is making it so much more difficult. And Chris raises a very interesting point with regard to the fact that she's a woman. There used to be a mentality that, okay, you got to be really careful when you're handling a female. And it still is the case, except for Donald Trump. Donald Trump would go after puppies if he needed to in order to win.
He went after cats.
And he did go after dogs and cats. And my point is, you don't have to like it, but in this election cycle, given what Kamala Harris is doing to push back, it's going to be effective, I think.
That's all the time we have today. I really want to thank our guests, Warren Hardy, who's a lobbyist and a former Republican state senator, and Chris Giunchigliani, former Clark County commissioner and a state assemblywoman, and especially Amber Renee Dixon. She is the host of Nevada Week at Vegas PBS, and this was a special 1-hour presentation with Vegas PBS. Amber, thank you so much.
Hey, I was happy to be here.
Join us tomorrow. What new gizmos in gaming are being touted at the G2E conference? And we'll have an update from the Southern Nevada Health District. That's tomorrow morning at 9. We'll see you then. This is State of Nevada.